to Your Next Chapter with Stacie Schlichtenmeyer. I am Balen Height, and this morning we are diving into the alternate perspective of what we talked about last week. We've gone kind of the last couple weeks talking a lot about the selling process. This week, we're going to pause that and we're going to go to that buyer's process when you enter the offer stage, because I think that's very important to kind of stop, reflect, and talk about that from both the seller and the buyer. First, before we do that, Stacie, how are you this morning?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you, Balen?
Not too bad, not too bad. You did mention to me that you were going to be participating in a 10K this weekend.
Yes.
So that kind of snuck up on the calendar, but do not fear. Stacie is in great shape and ready to run. From everything that I've gotten to know about Stacie, she's actively running, and for me, if I saw a 10K on Saturday, I would probably jump states or try to run away from it. Stacie's not going to have any problems. At least I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to finish, right? You don't have to be fast.
That's right. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and jump on into this morning's topic. And we're talking about the offer process from a buyer's perspective, so placing that offer. Just when you start to think about the buying process, or from a buyer's perspective, the offer process, what are some things that kind of stand out to you, Stacie, especially when you're working with first-time clients? Not necessarily maybe first-time home buyers, but just those first-time clients of yours.
Yeah, so for me, really getting to know my clients, most of the time that is going to be the answer. Because whether or not they're a first-time buyer or not, I mean, it does matter, but really finding out what their needs are. So obviously, if they're pre-approved, that's fantastic. What type of loan are they using? That very much depends when we're looking at properties, what that's going to look like. There's a lot to that as far as where earnest money is coming from. Do we have any sort of down payment assistance? So really getting the whole picture is very helpful. So to be informed.
Let's talk about the timeline a little bit. It varies, I'm sure, when the market's different and there's so many different situations. But what's an honest kind of timeline for someone who's buying a home and they're placing that offer? What can they expect?
So I would say if someone's like, okay, I'm ready today to place an offer, I'm going to say that's fantastic. Obviously, if that's the case, then we have a pre-approval that is valid, usually within 90 days. From a local lender is going to be best for sure. And then submitting that offer, like in Indiana, we have standardized forms, which is wonderful because not all states do. So this is a 9-page contract. It is a binding agreement. It is something to be taken very seriously. It will hold up in the court of law. So just to make sure that your buyer is fully informed with everything. In the world that we live in, people are so used to scrolling and accepting without reading the terms. And as much as I appreciate when my clients trust me fully and I triple and quadruple check my contracts, still for them to be informed and to know what they're getting themselves into is very important.
So there's no going back on the offer. Once it's signed, sealed, like, is there a pullback process, a contingency somewhere in there? I mean, it's a pretty serious thing when you're ready to place that offer. You're not messing around with it.
Yeah, so earnest money is kind of your good faith deposit. You place that offer, you're able to rescind that offer until essentially it's been executed. So if it's been signed by the other party, it is an executed contract. So it is legally binding at that time. Most often, we're going back and forth with a counteroffer, but once it's accepted, then earnest money is due, usually right away within a couple of days. That earnest money is that good faith deposit. So for some reason, if we don't get to the closing table, that money is kind of up, I don't want to say for grabs, but depending on who is at fault for not getting to the closing table, buyers do potentially lose their earnest money. So I always want to make sure that they're fully informed and aware, because sometimes that earnest money is quite a chunk of money, and in multiple offer situations, sometimes that earnest money will be increased to get the offer accepted. And so that's fine as long as they're aware of what that risk is.
And once, help me through this, because this is kind of internally here. I just bought a house a couple years ago and I forget. When that offer's been accepted, is that the time when you would get that inspection, if you can? I know there's sometimes it's as is, there's not really the inspection included, but is that the time you get that inspection, or is there a process in there where sometimes you have to go without that inspection?
Yeah, so every state is different. In Indiana, yes, it is common that after your offer is accepted, you'll have an inspection contingency period. So that amount of days is different. It's written into the contract. And so most often, then yes, that inspection is done, usually within a week or 2 weeks of the accepted offer. And then repairs can be negotiated after that. Even in an as-is home, which we do see a lot of, you can still get those inspections. It is still in the buyer's best interest to do that. However, I have a contract right now that we're negotiating. It's an as-is, and it's a first-time home buyer. So that's where I want to pump the brakes and just make sure that they're fully informed that, yes, you can get this inspection, but it's more just for your own peace of mind, because we cannot ask the seller to make any repairs. And actually, if we do with an as-is, it's cause for the contract to be void, to be totally honest. So to just be aware that it's kind of for your own self-knowledge. If there's something significant there, then obviously that's another conversation. But more often, it's just to kind of be informed, to have an idea of what you're getting yourself into.
Why is it not in my best interest to present an offer individually? Why can I not go for the there's licensing reasons and
Sure.
everything you have, but why could I not, just as someone who wants to buy a home, walk to my neighbor's house and say, here's the offer, here's the cash. Why should I work with you? Why do you need that agent?
Yeah, there are so many things in a real estate transaction that you don't know. And even after being almost 4 years in, every single transaction is very different. And so it doesn't mean you can't, right? You could. And it's no different than if you were to represent yourself, in the court of law, or if you were to do your own surgery. You can. Should you? Is it in your best interest? When you're dealing with the largest asset of your life, we do this every day, right? And also, again, kind of piggybacking on last week, having someone that's a neutral third party, right? They're not emotional in the situation, empathetic, communicative, but again, have their, you know what you're doing. And we don't always have the answers, and that's okay. But having the resources and the knowledge and the experience to be able to know where to go to get them is the game changer. It's like, we know that 22% of contracts, even with representation, fall out and don't get to the closing table. The chances of two unrepresented buyers and sellers coming together and getting to the closing table, it does happen, but it is very few and far between.
And probably not in our current environment, and really the environment with the real estate market that we've seen the last couple of years, probably even slimmer of a chance with how active the market is. Would you say that's pretty fair?
Sure, absolutely. Like, there are obviously a lot of less than arm's length transactions that happen all of the time. And when I say less than an arm's length, where, maybe you're selling a property to a sibling or your, daughter, and that's, again, totally fine. People are able to do that. And, they may not need or want an agent, and that's, again, totally fine. But when you're talking about those arm length transactions, which are what comparables are used for, and that's, obviously what we want to have the best data. And so if you're selling a house, to someone in the family, you may be giving them a deal, and that's fine. You can do that. But then in the future, when someone's trying to comp a house out for a price, you wouldn't want to use that. And so just being informed, and so having that knowledge.
And in those situations, you're way less, generally speaking, as long as you have a good relationship with your family or neighbor or whatever, you're probably way less exposed to risk and different
Absolutely.
things that you might be open to with a buyer or a seller, or I guess in this case, a seller of a home you probably have no relationship with at all. And
Sure.
you, Stacie, would be our only connection to that that seller. So I think that's really important to remember, that this is a process that it's very important to have someone in your corner like you that can kind of guide us through these pitfalls and make sure that not only is our offer going to be accepted, but it's competitive. And that's kind of what I want to spend the rest of our time on. Very reasonable in the market that we have today, that you are not the only offer on a home. There are situations, but more than likely not, you are probably that only. There are more offers than your own. What is that process like when there are multiple offers on a home, and how do you try to position your client to make sure that yours is the best?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love to win. So, to be totally honest, and so to have a client that's like, hey, we want this house. We know that there's a lot of offers, and we may have already had that conversation. This is where we're willing to go, or hey, at all bets, let's get this house. I'm calling that agent. I'm trying to have a conversation. How many offers do we have? What sort of financing terms do we have? Do we have an all cash offer? Just to try to find out as much information as you can for your buyer. And obviously that rapport with the listing agent. So often that's where the magic happens, right? Just being a person, trying to ask questions and get clarity around how you can position yourself. And so often I will say, like my buyer loves this house. What do we need to do to make this happen, right? And I try to pick out the things that I know that stand out about my buyer that maybe would be something that a seller or listing agent, would really like. So, for example, on a house where I know maybe there's another offer that, has an FHA loan and that may be an issue as far as repairs and it's an as-is. Well, I have a conventional buyer, right? I have a conventional non-contingent buyer who is very motivated, right? And so just trying to be open and transparent, but yeah, letting them know, like, I have a ready, able, and willing buyer that's ready to put an offer in on this house. What does that look like? What is that going to take? What's most appealing to your seller? And often I will say, like, obviously, everyone wants, not everyone, but usually you want the highest price. What aside from price is important?
Yeah.
And as a listing agent, if I'm getting multiple offers and I have buyer's agents that are inquiring about those things, when my seller says, hey, like, I don't know how to make heads or tails of these, what's your perspective? My perspective is this agent is communicating, they're asking questions, they're trying to use leverage, they're trying to get their buyer the best deal and make it a win-win. And then I've heard crickets from this and this and this, And so if the offers are very, very similar, sometimes it comes down to that.
Yeah. Well, I got an example of that. My dad sold a home, and it was in our neighborhood, on our street, and his big thing was, yes, he wanted to get out what he put in, but he was more concerned about maybe who was coming in, younger family, kids, kind of fitting the mold of the neighborhood. And you really probably wouldn't have known that had you been his representative and been able to kind of talk to him about that instead of just kind of chasing that best price. So it does happen. You're right on that. Is there anything that, term-wise, definition-wise, that is in this offer process for a buyer that are some words that they're going to want to know about or hear about, as far as like things that might just go, common language for you, but might just go over their head in the sense that you would explain it to them, but they might be hearing for the first time when they're placing offers?
Sure. I think when we start talking like closing costs, contingencies, and so often people are confused about the difference between an inspection and an appraisal. And so from first-time buyers, they often interchange those words, and they are very, very different. But I can see if you're not in the world every day, an inspection is something, it's, by a neutral third party. The buyer basically hires, if you will, to give that inspection of the property. An appraisal comes from the buyer's lender. So an appraiser is a neutral third party that is hired through the lender to appraise the value of the property. And so sometimes there will be appraisal repairs, depending on the type of loan. But those things I think can easily be confused. And so it's really important. I try to be very clear about that. And contingencies. Buyers, I think, often, especially if they have experience buying in another state, because other states are so different, that verbiage is similar but different. And I do work with a lot of relocation clients, so I always want to make sure that we're talking, like we're speaking the same language. And so when they are saying things, a lot of times I'm just asking questions. Okay, just to make sure, to be clear, are we talking about the inspection contingency period? Or like we don't have lawyers in Indiana, we don't have a lawyer review period, right? So making sure that we're all on the same page about those things.
You'd be very well versed in different areas. I mean, you're talking the law there at the end, just making sure that
I'm not a lawyer.
Not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but you have to kind of understand those where things could go if X and Y happen to get to the next step.
Illinois is right next to us. I work with a lot of relocation clients. Illinois is a lawyer review state. They have like 12 or 15 different purchase agreements. You have more or less buying power depending on the county you're going to live in because of the tax rate. It's just very different. So like I have a buyer right now from there. It's just to have that knowledge and just know that he's used to things being very different.
Yeah,
so
they're not going to understand that. And that's why we've got you, Stacie.
Yeah.
That's why we've got you. Real quick before we go, if anybody was able to take anything away from this or is looking to buy, sell, looking to right size some estate stuff, how can they get a hold of you?
Oh, you can call me on my cell phone, 574-334-7105. You can also text me. And my email address is LakeCityStacie. That's LakeCity, STACIE @kw.com. You can also stop in our brand new fancy office, 212 South Buffalo.
Yeah, just had the opening last week. It is beautiful. Make sure you stop in, say hey, and have a great weekend, everybody. We appreciate it. Stacie, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's
It was
Stacie
a pleasure.
Schlichtenmeyer as we wrap up your next chapter here on News Now Warsaw.